What's up guys? Today in this quick video we're going to cover how to MIG weld stamped steel. So we get a lot of cool little metal stamped steel components like this, and the trick is how do you weld them? And specifically today we're going to be talking about super thin stuff like this. How do you MIG weld this without just melting the crap out of it? That's what we're going to cover. Alright, so the first thing we're going to have to do is adjust our MIG welder settings. And along with the settings, we're going to need to make sure that we're using the correct size wire. Now, whenever I'm doing this ridiculously thin stamped steel, I mean, you can literally bend this stuff with your hands, which is kind of how I formed this leaf here. Usually this stuff comes flat, but the beautiful thing about this stamped steel is, you know, when you're doing cool things like leaves and flowers and stuff, you can kind of bend it around to make it a little more lifelike and customize it a bit. Anyway, I digress. When welding this really thin stuff, you want the smallest size wire you can possibly get. Now for us, we use 023 wire and run that through our MIG. Now, when it comes to settings, that's when it gets a little tricky. Now, the reason this gets a little tricky is because when you look on your machine settings chart and you put in all your settings, so you've got 2-3 wire you're going to be welding, we'll just say the smallest, the thinnest gauge material for this example, it gives you your settings, and these are the settings that you would use if you were only welding that gauge material. The problem is with this stamped steel and most of these types of components, you're generally welding them to thicker material. So if you were to stick with these settings, your weld probably wouldn't hold, and their stamped steel would probably eventually break off of that larger piece that you welded it to. Are you following me? So you might think, okay, well, I'll just use the settings for whatever the thicker material would be. Well, that can work sometimes meaning, let's say you have something really small like this 1/4 inch rod here, and we just welded some leaves onto this cool little business card holder thing. It's just a dainty, cute little thing. Well, that worked, but what happens if your material is a lot thicker than that? You're gonna blast right through this stamped steel. So what you have to do is play around with your settings. Now I realize that probably sounds a little sketchy because you're thinking, okay, well, I'm probably not gonna get this right the first time. What happens if I blast through a couple of these things? Well, really, you only need to sacrifice one of these little things, and this is why I always stress in ordering extra components of everything that you get. At least order 1 or 2. And being that stamped steel components like this are pennies, literally pennies, to order some of these things, always get extras. But you can take one and play around with your settings. Now with that in mind, we're going to be using the techniques that we've already learned in previous videos on how to weld thinner material to thicker material. Same principles involved here. We're going to be focusing all of our heat and our puddle on that thick material and basically pushing that puddle over on top of our thinner material. So the important lesson on this is to just use the same techniques that we use when welding thin stuff to thick stuff. Same technique, you're just gonna have to monitor and play around with those settings a little bit more depending on the size materials that you're using. So here's a little pro tip for you. I actually document all of my settings, and I suggest that you do too, because you're gonna have to be doing a lot of trial and error on these mixing these different size materials, but those settings, once you find them, they're always gonna be the same. So go ahead and get yourself a spreadsheet, a notebook, whatever, and document those. So I know what my settings are for my machine when I'm using some of these stamped steel leaves with like some 1/4 inch material versus some 1/2 inch material versus anything even bigger, cold roll, hot roll. I know this really thin stamped stuff isn't something you're gonna use a lot, but just like in the example you saw us do today, it's a great way to add some more flair and texture to bigger components, and also like we did today, we were actually using it to hide some of the grinding marks where they ground into the panel a little bit too much for my liking. So we're just kind of using that to hide some of those grinds. It's just a cheap and easy way to add a little more flavor to your design. So give it a try. Let us know how it works. That's it, guys. Let us know how your welding of super thin material goes in the comments below. And yeah, see ya.